Now we're joined by the newest member of the state Supreme Court in North Carolina, Justice Riggs. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So this race isn't as cut and dry as it seems. Now the Republicans are trying to block your ascent onto the Supreme Court here. They're challenging over 60,000 votes in a race that you won by just a few hundred here. Can you give a state of the race as it stands right now?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I want folks to understand that what the post-election processes recounts have shown is that I did win this race. I won by 734 votes, which out of 5.6 million is a small margin. North Carolina is a very hotly contested state. But not only did I win by 734, the first machine recount came up with produced the exact same margin, 734 out of 5.6 million votes cast. So the machine recount is done. It has confirmed our win and our margin. And we are about 98% done with the hand recount sample, which again is just confirming the incredible accuracy and diligence of our election officials in North Carolina, that it is working as intended and that I did win this race. And what is not recounts are great. Normal post-election processes inspire confidence.
Right.
Post-election protests that challenge the validity of our elections and the validity of tens of thousands of ballots, that's what's not normal and what I want folks to understand.
And so can you give some lay of the land of what they're seeking to do and what their justification for trying to do it is?
Yeah, so groups like the Republican National Committee here in North Carolina and other battleground states engaged in a fair amount of pre-election litigation, challenging ballots cast overseas by overseas citizens and military voters. So they're called UOCAVA ballots. They challenged those in pre-election litigation. They challenged registrations that where there might have been a piece of data missing in a voter's registration file, like a social security number or a driver's license number. The Help America Vote Act, which we've had for decades in this country, was about ensuring that those people still got their vote counted, even if there was a data issue, that they could show up with an ID, proof of residence, and vote. But the Republican National Committee, and now my opponent has taken the baton on this, are challenging registrations as being somehow incomplete and then jumping to the conclusion that they're invalid. So here in North Carolina, they're saying 60,000 voters are ineligible to be registered and voting. Two of those are my parents. So I know a little bit about
Yeah.
their experience. My father is a 30-year military veteran. He went to register and vote with his military ID, which doesn't have a social security number or obviously a driver's license number on it. It's a legitimate kind of identification, and
Right.
it's a solid documentation. So they want people, families like mine, military families, um, to have their votes discounted. And for someone whose job it is to enforce the precious constitutional rights of North Carolina citizens, I want folks to know that the way we conduct ourselves after an election speaks to our decency and our entitlement to sit in that office. And the way I'm proceeding through these post-election processes is on my values, valuing the fundamental right to vote and defending those rights, even when it's politically challenging or politically less than desirable. I mean, that's who you should want on the bench. It's who North Carolina voters picked. They
Correct.
picked
Right.
me.
Right. At the end of the day, I mean, it's not, it shouldn't even be a matter of you making your case right now, because the fact is that more North Carolinians voted for you, and so that's the end of it. To that point, then, who's going to be the final arbiter of these claims, but that are being put forward by Republicans? What is the actual process that we're in right now, and who's going to be the ultimate decider?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff we're still going to be figuring out. Right now, these protests are scheduled to be heard in front of the State Board of Elections on Wednesday. So we anticipate that administrative agency will make the first pass. And then there are questions of federal law and pending federal lawsuits that I think could resolve these questions. I mean, truthfully, these arguments have already been rejected by state and federal courts by bipartisan votes of our state board of elections. I mean, these are zombie legal arguments
Right.
resurrected from dead, don't carry any merit or weight. But it seems clear to me that this will end up in a courtroom, state or federal. There are certainly questions of federal law, but the first thing that will happen is the state board of elections will rule this week on the protests.
What does it say that for these Republican officials, this is a party that's largely predicated its identity on its purported support for the military, just to name one group in particular. And yet, so what does it say right now that they're seeking to disenfranchise the votes of North Carolinians who may have been serving in the military or are living overseas as the result of that, from actually having their voices heard in this election just because they weren't happy with the ultimate outcome?
Yeah, it should be troubling. It's troubling to me. I think it should be troubling to anyone watching this. I come from a military family. My dad's been deployed in war zones. My brother has. When families are separated because of military deployment, that is one of the most challenging times in a family's life. And to create extra burdens on them to have their voice heard in a political process, that should be very troubling. And it's certainly inconsistent with, you know, how the party has held themselves out to be. At core, it's just a reminder that when you have judicial elections, you can elect people who recognize that democracy doesn't defend itself and that it only works when people of strong constitutional convictions sit on the bench and are willing to protect these rights. Because if these rights are so flimsy that they can be disregarded because of disappointment in an election result, then those rights aren't very
Right.
protective. And so we need people who believe I will defend your right to vote and decide who gets to sit in this seat, even if I don't like it. And when someone won't say that and won't do that, and their words don't match their actions, we should take note of that and remember it for future elections. The voters have spoken this election and they have honored me with the opportunity to continue serving them. But it should be deeply troubling for future political election cycles for this unwillingness to concede a loss or to cast aspersions on the integrity of our election system rather than accept a loss. That's very, very troubling for our democracy.
Well, more broadly, that is like the crux of the problem that we're contending with in politics right now. It's that for the Republicans, dating back to 2020, a refusal to accept the election results when they lose, and an embrace of the election results when they win. So, like, what does it say that right now, even in a political environment where Donald Trump will accept the election results from the same entities, the same federal, the same state and local entities that showed that he lost the election results in 2020, he's perfectly content to accept those now, but in an event where you win your election against a Republican, that they'll cherry pick that out and say that actually this isn't okay because we're not going to accept any election results where we're not the victors.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand how folks can say former President Trump won North Carolina and those results are correct and right, and then point to another race and suggest differently. I mean, North Carolina
With the same
voters.
voters that they're challenging in your race that they were perfectly content to accept those election results when they voted for Trump.
I can't explain it because it doesn't make sense to me, but what I can do is commit to making sure that people understand that folks who have platforms like me, candidates running for statewide election, we have platforms where we can either um, affirm our institutions, protect our institutions that secure the way of life that we enjoy and value, or we can be petty, petulant political beasts. And I think this is a moment of character. It shows your character. And it's important to me to use my platform to say, this is wrong. This is not right. We cannot let it become normalized because if we do, I mean, when I was a voting rights attorney, before I joined the bench, this was a pretty new phenomenon in 2020. Obviously, there had been election disputes, but this idea of if you lost an election, it was then okay to defame people and say that there were massive irregularities with no basis for doing so.
Right.
That's a newer trend that was troubling to me as a practitioner in 2020. Now I sit as a jurist, not an advocate, but as someone who cares deeply about our courts, having independent courts, and knows how hard our election officials work in the face of low pay, in nuts hours, like just
Yeah.
really overwhelming hours, and now attacks from the public that aren't based on anything other than fear mongering and rumors. And I think it's important that people with platforms like mine are willing to say, I'm not just going to sit back and let this debate happen without working to bring awareness that we should learn information, put out good information for people to understand that, hey, when a recount produces the exact same number
Right.
as the initial count, that is an indicator, it is indicative of something is really working well here. And let's praise that and lift that up and celebrate it rather than figure out some other way to engineer the political outcome you prefer.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think for anybody on the right who had spent the last 4 years, if they were acting in good faith by saying that they were concerned about the election results, if they were truly concerned about what they saw in 2020, for which, by the way, there was no basis to dispute those election results, to look now and see that not only did you win your race, not only has it been reaffirmed by the recount here, but now to watch Republicans try to your exact point, engineer some victory out of a loss, that should draw the ire of every single person who had spent the last few years sounding the alarm about what they viewed as Trump's election results being undermined, and yet their silence, I think, to this point is deafening. So, which I guess brings us to right now, as it stands, Monday, December 9th. Where should we expect things to go from here? What's the immediate next step here?
Yeah, so we're encouraging voters in North Carolina who are on this list of 60,000 voters to, if you go to my social media, you'll see a walkthrough that explains how to see if your name is on it. Because with 60,000 people, your friends, your family, your neighbors, they're on that list, just like my parents are. And so we are encouraging them to look into that, to find out if they're there or to see if they know people, to share their stories. I mean, we're meeting people who have been voting for 20, 30 years, who are members of the military. We have a lot of military bases here in North Carolina, clergy members, local elected leaders, just they're folks from every walk of life. And we want people to share their stories because, you know, we think sunlight is a good disinfectant, and we
Yeah.
want people to understand that these aren't numbers on a piece of paper. They are real North Carolina voters who did everything right and don't deserve this kind of information. I encourage folks to follow me on social media generally because we're giving daily updates. It's important to me to put out good information to counter any bad information. And so go to trusted sources, the folks who listen to your podcast and watch it, they go to you because they know they get good information. I want to make sure that we're doing the same thing. We'll include updates about the legal proceedings, whether it's in front of the state board, state courts, or federal courts. And just for folks to know that there's going to be a lot of developments, I think, in the next 2 weeks.
Just for posterity here, where are you posting on social media, and what's your handle?
So on Instagram and Facebook, it's at Riggs for Our Courts. On X, it is Allison J. Riggs. And on TikTok, it is Justice Allison Riggs. But we're encouraging people, it doesn't have to come through me. If you use a hashtag count, don't cancel. We're trying to get people to share their stories that way so folks can see, like, look, it's not coming from a political campaign. This is people are frustrated by this kind of shenanigans 5 weeks after an election. Like,
Right.
folks should move on.
And what I'll do is I'll put in the post description of this video, I'll put a link to make sure that you can find out if you are in North Carolina, if your vote's been counted. I'll also embed the link right here on the screen on the YouTube video. Justice Riggs, congratulations on your win, and we'll be following this race closely. And if there's anything else we can do to elevate anything that's happening right now, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate you.